Most people think medieval England was simple. One king, one crown, one law, but up in the northeast, between the rivers Tees and Tyne, there was a glitch in the system, a patch of land where the king's writ barely ran, where another man, a bishop in a mitre, ruled like a king in all but name. He minted coins, he raised armies, he held his own courts, and for the people who lived there, he wasn't just a churchman. He was their lord, their judge, and in many ways their owner. This was the Palatinate of Durham, a kingdom inside a kingdom. And if you were a peasant in a village like Middridge, this strange political setup shaped every hour of your day, from the second you woke up to the moment they took your best cow when you died. In this video, we're going to step inside that forgotten world. Section 1. What was the Palatinate? Let's start with the basics. A Palatinate was a region where a local lord held powers normally reserved for the king. In Durham's case, that lord was the Bishop of Durham, often called the Prince Bishop. Why Prince? Because inside his territory he could do things most bishops could only dream of. He could raise his own army, build and control castles, run his own courts and appoint his own judges, collect taxes and fines for himself, even at times mint his own coins in practice. That meant if you lived in County Durham in the 13th and 14th centuries, you didn't go to the king's sheriffs or royal courts like people in most of England. Your top authority was the bishop sitting in Durham Castle and Durham Cathedral, ruling both souls and bodies. This weird arrangement grew out of the chaos after the Norman conquest. The north of England was hard to control from London, so the kings of England basically said, fine, we'll give the Bishop of Durham huge powers, as long as he keeps the Scots out and keeps the north under control. So Durham becomes a buffer zone, a militarized church state on the frontier. For the bishop, a dream. For the peasants, that's another story. Section 2. Serfs under the Prince Bishop. Now, what did this actually feel like if you were a peasant? Let's take the village of Middridge, just south of modern-day Shildon. We can actually see its obligations in a real 12th century survey called the Bolden Book, the bishop's answer to the Domesday Book. By the 13th century, that same system is still grinding away. A typical peasant there wasn't free. They were a villain, an unfree tenant we would now call a serf. The land they farmed didn't belong to them. They belonged to the land, and the land belonged to the bishop. At Middridge, the survey lists around 15 villain households. Each one holds a plot, maybe around 30 acres. In return, the village collectively owes the bishop cartloads of grain, malt, flour and oats, cartloads of timber and fuel wood, dozens of hens and hundreds of eggs, a tax called cornage to help defend the northern border, a marriage fee. If a daughter wished to marry, her family had to pay permission money, known as merche, a death duty, often the family's best animal, when the head of household died. And on top of all of that, mandatory labor on the bishop's own land, several days each week and every year, one man from Middridge must serve castle guard at Durham or Norham in the Scottish borders, standing on the walls, physically defending the bishop's authority. Add all of this together, the dues, the payments, the restrictions, the forced labor, and you are standing very close to slavery. You can't simply walk away from the manor. You can't move to York and start again. Your life, your land, even your children's futures, all tied to the bishop's will. So when we talk about the Palatinate being a kingdom inside a kingdom, remember, for most people, it wasn't a grand political idea. It was the web that held their entire existence in place. Section 3. A day in the life of a Durham serf. Let's zoom the camera in. Imagine a villein family in Middridge around the year 1260. You live in a narrow village laid out along a green 2 rows of simple houses facing a strip of common ground. That layout is still visible in Middridge today. Your house is a simple cruck-framed cottage. 2 curved oak beams lean together to form the roof. The walls are wattle and daub, woven sticks smeared with mud and straw. The roof is thatched. The floor is just packed earth with some rushes thrown down. In the middle are open hearth, no chimney. Smoke curls up into the rafters, seeps through the thatch and hangs in the air. Your lungs are seasoned with it from childhood. There are no glass windows, maybe a wooden shutter or a bit of oiled cloth over a tiny opening. You, your wife, your kids, maybe an old relative all sleep in this one room, some on a straw mattress, some just on the floor. The chickens might come inside at night. A sick lamb might be by the hearth. Now the day. In summer, you're up at first light. You feed the animals, then head out, not to your own fields first, but to the bishop's demesne land. Maybe it's ploughing time. You're behind a heavy ox-drawn plough, turning the sticky Durham clay. Maybe it's haymaking. You're cutting grass with a scythe, stacking hay into ricks. Maybe it's harvest. You, your sons, and even your older daughters are in a line, reaping with sickles from dawn until dusk. You owe the bishop several days of work every week, plus extra days in harvest. Sometimes the whole household, except the housewife, is expected to turn out for forced harvest work. On days when you're not working the bishop's land, you're scrambling to keep your own strips productive so your family doesn't starve. Food. Most days it's some combination of dark bread made from rye, barley, oats. Wheat is for rich people and special feasts. Pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables bubbling in the pot. Onions, leeks, pea beans, cabbage, turnips, wild greens. Maybe a smear of butter or a scrap of bacon fat to flavor it. Meat is rare. A pig slaughtered in autumn, some salted pork and bacon. The odd chicken, scrawny mutton when an old sheep is no use for wool. You're not hunting deer or boar, that's the bishop's game. Get caught poaching and you risk mutilation or worse. You drink weak ale because the water isn't always safe. Kids drink ale too. It's low alcohol but full of calories. In winter, the days are shorter but the work doesn't vanish. You're threshing grain, winnowing, repairing tools, carting manure to the fields, fetching wood from the bishop's woodland, if you're allowed. Most evenings you've got just enough energy to sit by the fire, eat, maybe talk on the green on a summer night, and then sleep. It is relentless. This is the normal background hum of life in the Palatinate. Section 4. Middridge as a concentration village. Middridge itself carries scars of how this system was imposed. After the harrying of the north in 1069-70, when William the Conqueror devastated huge parts of northern England, many older Saxon settlements were destroyed or reorganized. Local tradition in Middridge holds that an earlier scattered village was swept away, and a new one was built as a planned village, 2 straight rows of huts along a green, tightly controlled, all under the bishop's thumb. One modern historian went so far as to describe medieval Middridge as a kind of concentration camp for labor. That language is modern and loaded, but it's not completely random. The point is, the villagers were concentrated, controlled, and worked. Your village layout, your obligations, your ability to move, all designed around feeding the bishop's system, his granaries, his castles, his retinues. In records you see hints of hierarchy inside the village too. Alongside the standard villains, there are men like Weekman or Anquetil, holding slightly different amounts of land and owing slightly different services. Some might be a touch better off, some worse, but nearly all share the same basic reality: legally unfree, economically fragile. And remember, all of this is happening in a border region that's constantly under threat, because beyond the bishop's lands are the Scots. Section 5, crisis years, famine, Scots and plague. The normal grind was bad enough, but then you layer in the crises. Between 1315 and 1317, heavy rains and crop failures bring the Great Famine. Chroniclers across northern Europe talk about people eating dogs, horses, even worse, grain rots in the fields, livestock dies in the mud. In a village like Middridge, if the harvest fails, you have no buffer. The bishop still wants his dues. The taxes don't magically vanish because it rained. Maybe he'll remit some obligations. Maybe he won't. Then there are the Scots. During the early 14th century, especially after Bannockburn in 1314, raiders under leaders like James the Black Douglas sweep deep into northern England. They burn farms, seize livestock, ransom captives. They know Durham is rich. They know clergy and monasteries hold treasure. The bishop's special powers were supposed to protect this frontier, but from the point of view of a peasant in a burning village, that's not much comfort. You might see your hayricks torched, your church looted, your neighbors dragged off for ransom. Even if your village escapes direct attack, the fear and disruption are real. And then around 1348, 1349 comes the Black Death. The plague sweeps through England, and Durham is hit like everywhere else. We don't have a neat list of how many died in Middridge, but we know from church records that priests are dying, tenants disappear from later surveys, and some holdings fall vacant. For those who survive, something strange happens. Labor suddenly becomes scarce and therefore valuable. In the later 14th century, you start to see more peasants moving into freer forms of tenure in Durham. Some villains negotiate better terms, some simply walk away to towns and take their chances. The Palatinate is still there, the bishop is still powerful, but the grip of serfdom slowly loosens, not because anyone had a moral epiphany, but because death and economics force their hand. Section 6. The bishop's world versus the peasant's world. It's easy to get stuck in the mud with the peasants and forget the other half of the picture. So let's pull back and contrast. On the hill in Durham, you've got Durham Castle and Durham Cathedral, stone, power, ritual. The bishop lives in halls with high timber roofs, private chambers, servants, stone walls, maybe even early glass windows. He holds court with knights, lawyers, and clergy around him. He rides out with an armed retinue. He presides over legal cases where peasants are fined for breaking manorial bylaws or failing to perform their services. He is part lord, part politician, part warlord, and part theologian. All across the surrounding fields in the Durham countryside, you've got people like you and me just trying to survive. They know the bishop not as a distant theological figure, but as the reason they owe eggs, why their cousin has to stand guard at a castle, why their neighbour got fined in court, why their daughter's marriage cost them a cow. To them, the Palatinate is not an abstract legal curiosity. It's the everyday structure of power. Section 7. Why this matters and where this channel goes. So why does any of this matter now? Because when you drive through places like Middridge, Bishop Auckland, or the ruins scattered across County Durham, you're not just looking at old stuff. You're looking at the fossilized skeleton of a semi-independent state that once sat inside England. A state where the bishop was prince, where villages were deliberately designed and controlled to feed that system, where ordinary people lived lives that were hard, restricted, but also full of the same stubbornness, humor, and small acts of resistance you'd expect from any human beings. In future videos, we'll go deeper into this world. We'll follow real raids and battles on this frontier. We'll walk the roads serfs might have taken if they tried to run, town air makes free in their heads. And we'll weave this history into the stories of fictional characters, serfs, priests, mercenaries, whose lives collide with the Prince Bishop's machine. For now, you've met the stage, the Palatinate of Durham, a kingdom in